and thank you all for this wonderful opportunity. I hope all can see my screen. There is a very important Sendai framework which has been discussed in the previous speakers, and also a lot of nations are taking very cautious note of this framework. And leading into the UN conference on water, there is a lot of places where we could have overlaps and also places for improvement. Can I change the slide? Yeah, thanks. As everyone knows, water is one of the key instruments that can cut across all of these sustainable development goals, especially next. Yeah. So basically, we know all that 6 and 14 are blue in color. So we do have water, very key aspect. But most importantly, if we drill down further, water does cut across all these sustainable development goals. And the idea is, if we manage water properly, there is a way for good sustainable development across the world, especially in developing nations, because that is where the impetus is. Next slide, please. So this is a vision statement of the UN 2023 Water Conference, and we could see that in the pipeline, or the water that flowing, it does include the statement that water connects all SDGs. And more importantly, this is the understanding they have, and to enable further water conservation and unite the world for water, there is a need to bring all the connectors and partnerships together. The action-oriented research is needed more, and as an academic, it is very important for us to look at where is the action, and the output has to be action-oriented, on the ground. So that is where I work as the Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas. We focus formerly and mostly on rural communities, because that is more vulnerable, and they are finding it very hard for climate mitigation and resilience. Adaptation is key. However, mitigation is needed for long-term effects. Thank you. Next, please. So these are the comparisons between the Sendai framework and the UN Water Conference. And you could see that almost identically, the key points have been shared across the conference and the framework. So it vouches for action-oriented work, whereas the UN Water Conference focuses on water for SDGs and water action decade. There's a need for building resilience as per the Sendai framework, and the UN Water Conference does look into the sustainable development and new balance, wherein funds have to be allocated, yes, for development, but it has to be sustainably developed. So there has to be a balance between your water use and also water conservation, especially leading into the sustainable development goals. And then the climate resilient infrastructure and communities have to be backed up with funds so that they can bounce back on climate disasters, especially floods and droughts. On the Sendai framework, we do have the regional and national strategies to be harnessed, whereas the regional and national strategies are currently not existing in many places or outdated. The climate change, unfortunately, is hitting faster than the strategies themselves. So they have to be updated dynamically more. On the Sendai framework, we do have need for better cooperation and commitments, which is also echoed in the UN Water Conference vision for the need of more collaborations, both inter and intra, and a new balance, again, the same term that they use for building resilience. So there should be more funds allocated for preparedness and also to help more the vulnerable people. Better review of action plans and long-term approach is also vouched in the Sendai framework, and that is also sinking into the UN Water Conference by using robust review methods and partnerships. Next, please. So this work that we did for the World Bank on the South Asian Water Initiative, mostly on the South Asian countries, we were given a task to look at climate change science, knowledge, and impacts on water resources. As water is the most important driver for all of these, we did drill down to each country in the South Asian Water Initiative Forum, and we found that the data itself is not as good for driving new models to understand resilience or adaptation. Mitigation does occur in some aspects on the government or the corporate and industries, etc. But those who are vulnerable are more hit, and they need resilience. And also early warning systems. So understanding current and future scenarios is still a very, very Herculean task. The climate change models have predicted more floods and more droughts, how in 10 years, in 20 years. But however, the current year is experiencing more than the predicted model outputs. So this is not good for resilience and for preparing for any disaster management. The understanding of geophysical processes, the science behind it is also less and needs to be working in tandem with resilience and mitigation plans. There is a lack of cooperation that exists between agencies, transboundary, interstate, because water or climate change disaster is not looked at a regional issue. It is more like a national issue. And so unless and otherwise countries come together and work together on understanding and providing data, then it will not be as successful. So this is also reflected in the Sendai framework. So the capacity is still needed on understanding these data, producing more water warning systems, models, and resilient prototypes. There is a need for win-win situations. Even if climate change happens or not, we do need to conserve the water. We do need to bring up the lives of more vulnerable people so that they will not hit by this development agenda. Next, please. The most vulnerable, at least in the regional where I work, are the farmers, the local stakeholders, the rural stakeholders. They do not have the infrastructure or the venue for the infrastructure to go and place their belongings, livelihood options during a disaster. And water, unfortunately, does play in both the extreme disasters and natural disasters, A, the floods, and B, the droughts. Both have to be predicted well in advance to create any resilience or mitigate or adaptation for these farmers. And you could see that they are in big depths. I thank the ambassador previously for speaking on this very important note on delaying the depths and giving them the space to breathe and work on the resilience and mitigation. There are many studies that have been done. However, still, the numbers might be much stronger and much harsher because not all deaths and livelihoods and lives lost are not linked directly to the natural disasters. Next, please. So the UN Water Congress agenda brings all these visions together, and climate risks, especially on water, too much water is floods, too less water is droughts. That could be the next pandemic, as clearly expressed in the water agenda. However, the positive note is water can provide us opportunities. It does bring all the stakeholders together because farmers are not only producing the food, but also they require a lot of water. So they can also have collaborations with other stakeholders like power, city development, domestic water supply, etc. It also helps in strengthening capacities and provide solutions that can be replicated and scaled. Move towards a more holistic approach. Right now, water was kept as silos, the disasters were kept as silos. But now it's a common problem. Unless and otherwise it is understood as a common problem, there is no space for engagement and improvement. Rapid assessment is needed, and everyone has to work 4 times faster as per the UN Water Congress, and scaling up with scientifically validated data is much needed. And for this, next please. What is required is let the data flow as water. This has been stopped in many locations, both inter and intranationally, and this does not lead us to understand the depth of the disaster that we are facing unless we understand the reality of the disaster. The strength of the disaster is very proactive methods cannot be adequately formed. It's more reactive. Whereas after disaster, we work on some solutions, whereas we are not prepared beforehand to work on it. So with this, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity. The Sendai framework does give all these points as headlines, and the UN Water Congress wants to work more on these lines so that the nations are more prepared for resilience and the vulnerable people's voices are heard.